Hey friends, welcome to another episode where I'm going to pick one of my creative artistic heroes and talk about them for about 10 minutes or so. This is Sebastio Salgado. He is the photographer that did not get me to pick up a camera initially, but got me to pick up a camera and treat it as art. And the way that I came to Salgado's art is through an exhibition at the Joslin Art Museum in Omaha, Nebraska, which is my hometown. And it was a merger of his Workers series and his Migrants series. It had stuff that I recognized from a Smashing Pumpkins video that had borrowed some of the imagery. It had work that was taken in rendering plants in South Dakota, and I think I was age 19 when this exhibit took place in 1997. I was kind of feeling a little lost in my life. My father had just died. I got a small amount of money from his time in the Army, but there was no inheritance to speak of. And I went to this Salgado exhibit. I saw stuff that I identified as very humanist, very empathetic towards his subjects. They usually featured, working class or lower class people, but in an empathetic light. It kind of reminded me of a visual version of, say, U2, Midnight Oil, Bruce Springsteen's Ghost of Tom Joad era work. I really connected with it. I mean, Salgado from Brazil, but lived in France for a large period of his life. He was an economist originally. He understood the issues that went into what he's portraying. Because I connected with him, I wanted to make work like him. Now, he was a world traveler, had grant money and such that allowed him to spend, thousands, probably millions of dollars on his travels, his gear. And that was not my situation, nor have I ever been such a serious enough person about my craft to put my life on the line the way that Salgado does when he made this work. One of the criticisms of Sebastio Salgado, I think an unfair criticism, is that he's showcasing a lot of human suffering around the world. And to that, I would say that if nobody went and made art that connected with people to, say, famine in Ethiopia, then we don't know that story. That story gets forgotten by history, the way that some things like the Armenian genocide gets pushed aside because of whatever political trends are in existence. It's unfortunate that we only connect with people who are in dire straits when we have a visual, when it's in front of us. And I think there's a lot of people in modern life who can see maybe somebody suffering from a hurricane or a tsunami, some kind of disaster that didn't have a whole lot to do with human cause, and they ignore it the way that they walk past someone who may or may not be alive or dead on the street, just because they say, well, that's a homeless guy and it's not my problem. We just sort of put these blinders on. So I think it's a good thing that Salgado got out there, told the stories of people that we would not know the stories of, and he told it in such a superbly crafted way that it makes it hard to ignore. Now, this is, over 20 years past when I was initially inspired by Sebastio Salgado, but I'm taking the time to dig deep into my favorite artists, see what sort of interviews, commentaries there are about them out there. And Wim Wenders, a filmmaker who made Until the End of the World, several other films, collaborator with U2 largely in the 90s. He had a documentary created with Sebastio Salgado and Salgado's son.
A photographer is literally somebody drawing with light, a man writing and rewriting the world with lights and shadows.
When Salgado speaks, and he talks about his travels, he gets to the point where he had documented in the mid-90s the Rwandan genocide.
In the 90s, during the 94 to 2000, I photographed a story called Migrations. Became a book, became a show, but during that I was photographing this, I lived a very hard moment in my life, most in Rwanda. I saw in Rwanda the total brutality. I saw the death by thousands per day. I lose the faith in our species. I didn't believe that was more possible for us to live longer. And I started to be attacked by my own staphylococcus. I started to have infection everywhere. When I did love with my wife, I had no sperm that come out of me. I had blood.
I don't want to talk too much about what's in the documentary. If you are interested, I encourage you to seek it out. It's incredibly well made. But you see this turning point when he can no longer deal with the ugliness of humanity. With that Rwandan genocide, he explicitly states something like, "There's no hope for humans. I could not put my faith in any salvation any further." And that's when he stops traveling and doing documentary work of the workers, the migrants, the conflicts around the world. What does he do when he can no longer create the work that he has been doing up to this point? He gets involved in this project called Genesis, and Genesis takes him to some of the most primitive, pristine areas on Earth. And when I say primitive, I mean, untouched by development. So Galapagos Islands, he gets involved in landscape photography, wildlife photography, stuff that had been outside of his scope up until this point. And some of his friends are like, "Well, you're a portrait photographer, you need to focus on that, and you don't know anything about landscape or animals." And he basically says, "I'm gonna learn it." And I think Genesis, it's clearly identifiable as Salgado, but it is so soul-filling in the way that a lot of his other work is soul-crushing. And it goes to prove when you reach a dead end, when you fall into despair and depression, as Salgado did, it's not the end. It might be the end of one particular path, but if you're a creative person, you can be creative with your exits from depression. You can find a new road. It can lead to just a new phase in your life. You don't have to be locked into the thing that you've created up to this point. You don't have to be locked into this way of thinking, this way of marketing, whatever it is. Post-Genesis, he and his wife had purchased a huge swath of land in Brazil, and they created a foundation that ended up planting millions of trees, suddenly in an area that had been burned, bulldozed, assumption that that was permanently lost forever. Within Salgado's lifetime, within his wife's lifetime, they can see rebirth, regenesis of something that's a vital part of human ecology. And that's where the documentary ends. Salgado's still alive. He can still be capable of contributing great things to the environment, to artistic discourse, but I found it such an inspirational tale. I'm looking for new ways to express myself, whether it's new photographic subjects, traveling to new places, getting into some of my other creative interests like comics, music, filmmaking, animation, and sort of expanding those beyond the scope that I have. And I learn a lot from Salgado. I learn a lot from Hokusai, Miyazaki, Andy Warhol, Diane Arbus, Tom York, and the rest of the people in Radiohead. Any of my creative heroes. I am finding when I look at the long-term scope of their career, they hit a dead end, they make a left turn, right turn, they get up, they try something new, and it's almost always, a thing that revitalizes them as people, not just creators. And I think that's really exciting. So if you're interested in Salgado's work, what I've showcased here, I encourage you to seek out some of his books, whether you buy them, you get them from the library, you just look at it online. There isn't a single bad image he's ever made, in my opinion. And If you want a further deep dive, I recommend Salt of the Earth documentary created with Wim Wenders and also co-directed by Salgado's son. It is well worth the time you'll spend watching it, and I think you'll leave feeling like a better human being. Thanks for watching. Talk to you next time.